on locations throughout the world.
Standing passengers, please do not lean against the doors.
Picture goers, we bring to you new films of interest.
Chicago in State is next. Doors open on the left.
The miracle of the motion picture.
Please be considerate when talking on your phone or listening to electronic devices.
Chicago's a nice town if you're looking for pizza.
Welcome to 4 Stars, a Chicago film podcast, a podcast about Chicago and film. I'm one of your hosts, Paco Alvarez, a journalist based in Chicago. For this episode, my co-host Jeremy Martyr interviewed Kevin Shaw, the director of One Golden Summer, which just had its world premiere at the Chicago International Film Festival. One Golden Summer follows Chicago's Jackie Robinson West Little League team, which in 2014 became the first all-black team to win the Little League U.S. baseball championship. There's one more screening left of One Golden Summer as part of the festival. You can catch it on Sunday, October 26th at 2:30 at the Logan Center for the Arts. It's a great Chicago movie and you should go check it out. Hope you enjoy the interview.
And we want to welcome to the podcast today, director of One Golden Summer, Kevin Shaw. Welcome to the podcast, Kevin. How you doing?
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. I'm doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's great to have you on. I keep saying again and again, this has been my year of baseball. I sort of helped program the series at the Music Box, the baseball movie series. And that was the first part of my year. And now having Chicago International Film Festival honor your film as the opening night movie, it's sort of been the capper for me. Can you start off just by telling us your connection to the city of Chicago and what that sort of honor of being the opening night film means to you?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Chicago. I grew up on 92nd and Stony Island, Calumet Heights, Pill Hill neighborhood. So, Chicago just runs through my blood. Love the city, love everything about it. Big supporter of everything that we do here in Chicago. And so to, have that honor of not only just, playing at the festival, the Chicago International Film Festival is one of the longest running film festivals in the nation. And so just to be able to have that honor of not only playing in the festival, but then being the opening night selection, I never would have dreamed that was something that was possible for me when I was a young kid growing up there in Pill Hill. So we carry that honor and distinction with just great humility, and really we're excited for everybody who was involved with the film that we have this opportunity and that platform to have that kind of debut.
Can you tell me a little bit about your introduction to filmmaking, sort of your journey as a documentary filmmaker until you landed at this moment here today?
Yeah, I started off in sports television. That's what I studied in college. I was a journalism major, and eventually coming out of school, graduated from Michigan State University. My first job out of that was at ESPN. And I was able to work there in Bristol, Connecticut for about 5 years and kind of worked up the ladder from production assistant to basically an associate producer / feature producer, where I was out there doing stories and being able to go to big events and interview, big time sports celebrities. I had an opportunity to interview Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal and the time Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers were big NFL guys during that time frame that I was working at ESPN and stuff. So, I got a really, it was kind of like a graduate school course there of working in that institution. So after that, I left. I wanted to pursue filmmaking. I really love movies. And I really love the idea of being able to tell stories, real people stories, that is. So more in the documentary space. And I did what a lot of people thought I was crazy to do. I kind of left ESPN when I was at a somewhat high trajectory. I could have stayed there and been an executive or something like that, or laid off, knowing how it happened over there. But I went back to school and I went to a small art school in Nashville, Tennessee, of all places. I had tried to, I applied to some of the other film schools, obviously the USC's, NYU's of the world, didn't get in. And there was this school in Nashville, Tennessee, the Watkins College of Art and Design that accepted me. And I ended up going there basically because it was, not only a right to work state, but they had a lot of filmmaking going on because of that. So a lot of stuff going on in terms of film production, music videos, films coming into the States. So it was like a good little breeding ground away from the coast to kind of get your feet wet and get some experience and opportunities there. And so I went there for about two years and learned a lot. Did some short films. And out of that experience, I moved back east, and I actually worked in the DGA, the Directors Guild of America, Assistant Directors Training Program. And so that was a program that taught you how to be an assistant director. And I did it because it was an opportunity, again, to kind of open the door and work on some big productions, not necessarily thinking that would build into me being a director or anything, but I just wanted that experience, And I didn't make it through the whole 2 years. I'm a little bit older at that time frame, and I just think a lot of that work was beating me down. It's kind of like I felt like I was digressing in my career a little bit. Doing menial tasks that I had did before coming up in an earlier part of my career. And so, I ended up leaving that production, that opportunity. And right when I left there, I decided that, I'm going to go freelance, and I'm just going to kind of work the contacts that I had built through, just through my life, through the ESPN and other opportunities. And it's around that time where one of my former colleagues at ESPN, Krista Saponara, she called me, and she was producing a movie about Hall of Fame high school basketball coach from Jersey City, New Jersey, by the name of Bob Hurley Sr. He has two sons, Bobby Hurley and Danny Hurley, who are fairly well known in the basketball world. And she was producing a movie about the father in the high school that he coached at that was under financial duress. And despite all that, he had done a lot of great things there, had won 30 straight state titles and really built a large pedigree there. And that work ended up becoming, my first documentary film, The Street Stops Here, which was on PBS and ESPN. And that's how it kind of got started from there, a little bit of a winding road of doing some opportunities that you thought would open up some doors and didn't, and close other doors closed. And that's kind of my mantra, when one door closes, another one opens, and so I just kind of followed that, was able to get, documentary film career going.
And so when did the door open to the Jackie Robinson West team for you? When did that story come into your life? Were you keyed into it when it was happening in 2014? Or was this a story that you came to later on?
So in 2014, I was in between doing films and I was doing some freelancing and kept my contacts up. And I happened to be working with ESPN again as a remote producer. And I ended up getting an opportunity to work at the Little League World Series in Williamsport in 2014. And so I had a front row seat to watch the Jackie Robinson West team compete and, win that U.S. championship. And so that was amazing to watch as a Chicagoan. You're kind of behind the scenes rooting for them and hoping that they do well. And they did. They exceeded all our expectations there in terms of winning that championship. And I remember sitting in the stands for the World Championship game against South Korea because our work had pretty much been complete at that time. And so I was able to take that in They didn't win that game, but everybody was just so proud of those young men and what they had accomplished during that time frame. So, I knew the story really well, and then when the controversy hit, obviously I kind of took it most fans here in Chicago did, just really heartbroken and trying to understand what happened with the entire situation, and never really got a full picture of what went on. And I think once all the news media left after 2015, the story kind of faded away, and we never knew what happened to those guys. We never knew what happened to the families. We heard back and forth every couple years that there were some lawsuits going on and some litigation going on, but nothing really concrete until 2021. So 2020, Bob Title, who's the producer on the film, Bob, who people might know from the movies that he's produced with his partner George Tillman, another Chicagoan, Barbershop, Soul Food, The Hate You Give. He wanted to do a film about the Jackie Robinson West team. And the team actually did a cameo in one of the Barbershop movies. I think Barbershop 3, they did a cameo on. So
wow.
he had built a relationship with the families there, and was close to doing a narrative film about that entire experience. But then, all of the controversy broke out. And so he was like, well, I might pivot because there's still a story here, but I might do a documentary instead. And so with his partner on this project, Betsy Steinberg, who is well known in the Chicago space, the Chicago Film Office work that she did, and was a former head of Cartemplin Films. They combined, and they were looking for a director, and so they called me, and we had a few conversations about it, and I was like, yeah, I think this would be a great story to tell. At that point, the parties, Jackie Robinson West families, the coaches, and Little League International were all in litigation. So there was some sort of lawsuit that was going on with both parties. Both had sued one another, so they were fighting, and they were trying to figure out some sort of settlement, which eventually did happen in 2021. And that's around the time that we started filming, as that settlement just was announced. And then we went ahead and, started to make inquiries with all the families and all the parties that were involved about participating in a documentary.
Yeah, that's what I love so much about your documentary. It's fantastic, Kevin. What I love so much about it is we get so wrapped up in these media stories, right? They whip in like a tornado. They the controversy around this thing, and then they leave so quickly. All the vans pull off, everyone's gone, and there's still pieces to be picked up. And you being a person who was there on the ground floor when it was happening and staying around, caring about what happens in the city of Chicago, it feels so like the city, where it's like, these are just kids, these are just boys, and who have now grown into these remarkable adults. Seeing the two of the two players who were there at the premiere on stage, adults who have passions and desires and a future, was so incredible. Can you talk a little bit about the relationship you formed with those boys, and the pieces that you guys picked up together?
Sure. I mean, so we had 6 guys from the team participate in the film. Trey Hondras, DJ Butler, Darion Radcliffe, Josh Houston, Pierce Jones. I might forget somebody. I'm so sorry if I forget someone off the top of my head there. But those guys all participated. They wanted to tell their story. I think when they, as they grew up after the Jackie Robinson West experience, they all continued to play baseball. Marquise Jackson was the other guy there. Sorry, Marquise. They all continued to play baseball, and they wanted to have this dream of playing professionally and stuff. And so as they went on playing in high school and it went on in college, when people would realize that they were part of that team, they would always have that question: what happened? What did you guys really cheat? What happened there, et cetera, et cetera. And hearing that amongst all the other just chatter and kind of almost, I would call it bullying that they received on social media, Marquise Jackson at one of our Q&As recently had stated how, at the top of their fame, these guys on Instagram, their follower count just exploded. They have tens of thousands of followers. And then when the controversy hits and they have the title stripped away from them, those tens and thousands of followers are now hitting them with all types of derogatory messages, And so to be a young kid and absorb that kind of trauma there, the trauma that's built from that, it's tough to deal with. No doubt about it. And they had to deal with it and never had an outlet to really talk about it, really kind of unpack it and understand what was going on until now, until they became adults and felt ready to discuss these things. And so for me, that was always kind of the aim of the documentary. Yeah, we're going to tell you about what happened and we're going to relive the excitement of the entire experience so that you understand why the nation got behind these boys, why they fell in love with them. And then you're going to understand what happened and why that was heartbreaking for some, why that was redemptive for others. And then really kind of dive into what happened to some of the kids, some of those guys. It didn't work out well for all of them. There are some guys who were really traumatically damaged by the experience. But I do think that it definitely gave them all some sort of resolve, and it did create some character, some spine there in them, so that they realized that this is just one chapter of their life. This is not something that was going to define them. They were going to build from this moment and work towards continuing to reach their goals and dreams.
One of the many jobs that I have in my life is that I'm an educator at an arts high school here in Chicago. I teach film. I teach video editing, video production here at an arts high school with no sports, which kills me every day because I see that they want to move their bodies, they want to do stuff. So we got to get that feeling out, one way or another. What value do you think sports brings to education? And what do you think about the intersection between sports and art?
I mean, I think sports is the opportunity to tell a lot of life lessons. There's no doubt about it. Depending on what sport, and it doesn't matter. I think what sport you play. If you're playing a team sport like football, basketball, baseball, you're learning how to be a great teammate. You're learning how to lean on each other. You're learning how to root for one another. You're learning how to receive constructive criticism. It's building a mental capacity in you to deal with adversity, especially a sport like baseball, right? Like where you're only successful 25% of the time, right? In terms of getting hits and everything. So the mental aspect of that game is so large. Competing in that sport really gives you an edge, I think, in terms of how to deal with problems and dealing with adversity. So yeah, I think sports is it's a great bridge builder too. Like we saw how sports can cut across communities and bring people together. It did that in our city in 2014. You had folks from the north side, south side, west side, all coming together and enjoying watching the Jackie Robinson West team compete and get some pride behind it. So it's a bridge builder. It is a way to connect with people immediately. You might come from different political spectrums, but you both might be Kansas City Chief fans, or Chicago Bear fans, and immediately you have that connection that you can start to build a relationship with the person that you don't know, stranger. So I really look at that value and that power of sports as a way to kind of heal and connect people.
Yeah, you talk about how important this team was to the city of Chicago at that point in time. I can't explain. Well, I don't need to explain to you. We can talk about how tough it was in Chicago in that time period for sports. That was like soon after the first Derrick Rose hamstring injury. That was like both baseball teams had 70 wins that year. Like it was a rough time, and we were all sort of, Chicago sports fans are passionate, loyal, but always expecting the worst. And to have this sort of story sort of crop up from our hometown and become this national story, it really felt like a point of pride. Can you explain that feeling of that point in time in the city and what that meant to the neighborhood, to the city, and so on?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it well. All of our professional teams during that time frame were struggling. You had the promise of a Derrick Rose who was, always anybody that's going to be a star with the Bulls is always going to play in the shadow of the Jordan era. But here was a guy that was, from Chicago that we felt was going to be the guy, and he just got, hamstrung by injuries. So that was a disappointment. The Bears were no good. Both baseball teams were struggling. The Blackhawks had success, but were not doing well that particular year. So to have this Jackie Robinson West team kind of come out of nowhere unexpectedly and perform the way they did, and with the style and the joy and the exuberance that they took the baseball field every time out there and on a national stage, it was just exhilarating to watch them do it. And I think watching them do it at such a young age too was what the thing that people really got behind. So, hey, when they won, and the city gave them a ticker tape parade that would be reserved for, a Chicago Bulls championship or a Blackhawks Stanley Cup championship. That kind of said it all, that they were feted in that manner.
Yeah, there's this like rapid descent to like having parades. And then like we do with our idols in this country, we like to build them up and knock them down. There is that feeling of like, eventually this is going to go wrong, or eventually our team is going to lose or something. But these are real people. These are kids who are dealing with this in this moment. And as you said, this takes a toll on people's mental health. These kids went in different directions. Sorry, if you can remind me the name of the kid who has the song at the end.
Darion. Darion Radcliffe. Yeah.
Incredible story there. I feel like we are living finally in a time period where we are talking about mental health in sports. We have different players who, have been talking about their experience, either riding the minor leagues for years or never quite making it or making it to the top and being knocked down. Can you talk about the intersection of mental health in sports and as it related to the kids on the team?
Yeah, I mean, you look at a person first like a Josh Houston who had some mental health issues regarding a lot of the bullying and the criticism that was placed upon him after the title was taken away. How he didn't want to go to school. Really, he had fights many days at school, just kind of defending his reputation. And I think it really spoke a lot when he mentioned that, or at least his father had mentioned that. One of the rewards that the team had received, a varsity jacket, which I believe was made by the McDonald's Corporation. They gave the whole team these varsity jackets, which were fresh championship jackets and everything that you would normally wear around with pride, that you were part of this experience. Josh kept his jacket on the floor in the closet, tucked away. He didn't want to see it. There was nothing good that came from that jacket in his eyes. So that's really difficult. You look at Darion Radcliffe, who had even rougher going about it, where his mental health was really, really damaged to the point where he had to have some medical assistance and medical help. He went into a facility to kind of get his life back on track. That really speaks a lot to what this did to some of the guys, and it killed his love of baseball. It was more than just a depressive state for him. He just couldn't play the game that he loved anymore because of all the name calling and the bullying and the trauma that came from that, and not really understanding what where this is all coming from. It's like 1 minute ago you guys were loving me, and now you're calling me the worst names, calling me different racial slurs and things of that nature. It's just really despicable, that kind of dehumanization that went on in certain respects there. And we don't talk about that, right? So this is a story that was not told. As we had mentioned earlier, when the news cameras went away and the reporters went away, these are the things that these kids are dealing with and these families are dealing with. This is the aftermath that's not told. And, a lot of times there aren't the resources that you would think are available for families to deal with these issues when they hit this hard. And so, Darion and some of the families, I know the Butlers were big supporters of Darion and really helped him kind of get over the hump, get the help that he needed. But nobody knows that. Nobody's learning of that hardship until now. But I think it's important that we hear these stories. Mental health is a big deal. Especially, in the Black community, you don't hear a lot, us about Black youth, Black men talking about their mental health. There's this stigma that we have to present ourselves a certain way, a macho way all the time, that we can't shed a tear, that shows that we're weak or something like that. And I don't believe any of that. I feel like we're all human. We all deal with issues in a certain manner. And sometimes we do need help. We do need assistance. We do need that shoulder to cry on. We need somebody to help build us back up and let us know that the sun is going to rise again, that it's not all doom and gloom that we might think it is. And there's nothing wrong to admit that, because if that's going to help a person continue on in their life and continue on and strive, as like a Darion has done, right? Like he's pivoted from being that athlete, now pursuing something creatively still, being a music artist and doing well at that. That's great. He needed that to help fulfill himself and fill that void that had left because he couldn't play baseball anymore. So there's more people, I'm sure, like Darion and Josh, who are dealing with things in their lives. Might be young, dealing with stuff, not knowing where to turn, who to look to for guidance. They hear a story like Darion's or Josh's, then they realize that they're not alone in the world. There are people out there who love and want to support them. They just might need that guidance to get them, to take those first steps towards, improvement.
Absolutely. There's so many racialized elements that are under discussed when it comes to this story and many other stories like it. I think the most obvious is the media portrayal, the national media coverage of these kids, where they come from, the sort of like they had 5 minutes to write a story to write it, and they're not asking the boys about their life. They're not going to them. They're creating the narrative for them. That's one element that is this added layer of a racialized lens that is being put on these boys. And another one that I found fascinating was the limits on expression. That's another thing that we're going through these days in sports is celebration, expression, sportsmanship, like these questions that come through. There's a moment in the story where a player hits a home run, correct, and celebrates the home run. It's an exciting thing. You're in the Little League World Series, you're celebrating a home run, and then has to go apologize to the other team for it. Can you talk a little bit about that experience, that side of the sport, especially baseball, which has this racialized past of the way you're supposed to act? I mean, the team is named after Jackie Robinson, a player selected because of the way he acted on the field. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's this feeling that you have to be a certain way, act a certain way when you're playing sports, when you're playing a certain sport, when you're playing, and in this respect, baseball. And the incident that you bring up that's in the film, Trey Andres hits a home run and he does a little celebratory gesture. That is really just kind of harmless, right? He's like a cuckoo clock kind of gesture, like he flipped a team off or something like that, But because of that gesture that he made, one of the Little League officials asked him to go apologize to the other team. And what's funny is that when he does apologize to that manager, the manager's like, "Hey man, it's no big deal. Go out there and celebrate, dude. You did great." which shows you that, these things that sometimes these officials and what have you are so worried about perceptions and how people are going to come off, and kind of putting that more toward, this all black team that is in this space that it's a new space for everybody, to have them here in Williamsport. You didn't see that often or a lot at all, and so now that they're here, everybody has their kind of media or racial perceptions of how they're going to be and how they're going to act, and what have you. And I believe for the most part they probably surprised a lot of people in regards to how they were performing with their sportsmanship. They were there to just play the game, and they were doing it really well, and they were having just basic celebratory reacts that are really harmless and everything. So for him to have been called out on that one particular instant does reek a little bit of just bias that just was unnecessary. And I'm glad that the other coach, that manager, really thought nothing of it, and just kind of squashed it in the bud. But it does show you that those things exist in terms of how we perceive one another, and that you have to kind of go through this stage of actually getting to know someone, or seeing them beyond this invisible shirt that they're wearing that says, oh, I am black and this is how you think I'm going to be, or I am Hispanic, Latino, and this is how you think I'm going to be. We still have to get through those things. And it just takes it takes people to kind of recognize that we all do have those biases, and we have to continue to fight them and fight against them, and just really try to accept people for how they present themselves with their character and their actions, and not that invisible shirt that they're wearing.
So you brought up the league. You brought up the Little League World Series. You brought up these systems that were in place, and this really is a story of those institutions failing to protect these kids, right? That these things, these big financial juggernauts, who are happy to reap the benefits, let's say, of having a story like this, then turn around and so quickly to have the boys find out that their World Series has been stripped from them the same time that the rest of the country does is despicable to me. That is a huge failure on their part. Has there been a change from your perspective from the Little League World Series, or has it been more of the same?
I can't speak to what type of feelings the institution has toward the Jackie Robinson West, those former players and families. Obviously, that they were in litigation against one another and against the coaches. They all settled those lawsuits and are trying to move on with their lives. I guess it's hard to wrap your head around that whole idea, as you mentioned, of Little League International kind of reaping the benefits of the popularity of that Jackie Robinson West team. The ratings did double that year. There was a number of financial gains that were made. People were just really excited about the team, so a lot of merchandise was being sold, and just the popularity of the Little League World Series alone had risen because of their participation. And they were there on all of those trips that Jackie Robinson West took as they're being feted around the nation, whether that be TV appearances, whether that be the World Series that they went to, whether that be visiting President Obama in the White House. They were there for all of that. And so for them to kind of flip the switch so quickly once the controversy began, and strip the title from them, and not really have any sort of, it seems like not have any sort of real communication with anybody there. This is what's happening, and this is why it's happening, and it just happened. It is a failure, no question. I think one of the things that the film reveals which came from the litigation that was happening from 2015 to 2021 that happened in Discovery, was this idea that, we're talking about the boundary maps, and every Little League team that is supposed to compete in the Little League World Series is supposed to have a boundary map in the office there at Little League International. This is the map that says that all these players are eligible because they all live in this particular neighborhood. And Little League didn't have a boundary map for Jackie Robinson West during 2014. They just didn't have one, and so that alone is kind of a failure on their end, of not having a map and not being able to, if there was a problem with people's eligibility, this would have been nipped in the bud early on, because Jackie Robinson West wouldn't have been able to compete in some of those earlier tournaments that led up to, them competing in Williamsport. But they didn't have a map, and I know that office is a small office. It's not like it's filled with hundreds of employees. And I know that they are relying on, the honesty of the Little League teams to give them the proper information that's correct and all, but they didn't even have a map there in their office. And so that kind of speaks volumes to me that you didn't have a map, but now you're going to go ahead and you're going to punish them for having incorrect information on a map that you should have had in your files, way back when.
Yeah, it would be nice in our lifetime to see these boys vindicated, to see them, to have their World Series returned to them, to have them celebrated, for them to be punished for the mistake of adults, for the Bill Haleys and the Little League World Series and all these things that, were beyond their control, right? Like there were mistakes made there. I think that's probably true for other teams in the past as well. And so,
Sure.
so for but because this was a national story, because this was such a big deal and it got elevated to this position, it became this story that they have to take action. And for them to not even have a statement or a comment in your documentary, it speaks volumes. As you said in the Q&A afterwards at the Music Box, excuse me. As you said in your Q&A, the lack of comment speaks volumes there. It truly does. That for them to just pretend to move on because litigation has happened, that's not where stories are told. You have to be able to, if you have a position, you have to be able to defend it. And for these boys to still have this empty slot on their shelf is, for me, a true failure.
And I really don't. I would just add to that. I really don't like the idea of how they're not even recognized in the museum there. I think that's kind of revealing as well. I don't like erasure of anything in terms of history. So if we're just looking at the history books of this sport, Little League baseball, and you're having this museum, you could recognize that they competed in that tournament with some sort of asterisk, as long as it didn't dehumanize them in terms of that recognition, so the wording would need to be in the right space, but they should be there. They should be in that space in some way. I to just sit there and not have any little slice of their accomplishments in the museum doesn't feel right to me.
One of my favorite parts of the documentary is your interview with Lawrence Holmes. In this podcast, we respect and love the work of Lawrence Holmes here in the city. Can you talk a little bit about interviewing him and the importance of local media as well, as opposed to national media?
It was very important for me to have voices of people who were specifically who has specifically covered this story or have participated in the story, right? So obviously you want as many players who want to participate, as many family members who wanted to be there, coaches, etc. But in terms of the media who covered it, I wanted the folks who were, the boots on the ground, who were there kind of every day following this thing and knew it intimately. And so for me, it was really important to have somebody like a Lawrence Holmes, somebody like a Mary Mitchell, who had written many columns covering the Jackie Robinson West controversy and win. She did both and everything. Lawrence was a special guy because he had that tie to the Jackie Robinson West team. He had family members who had competed with the team. He had played Little League baseball. He had been part of that organization as well. He had his Little League trophy. So like he knew what it meant to a person like a Marquise Jackson, Josh Houston. He knew what it meant to pull up those stirrups and play for your Little League baseball team. And so I thought that experience would speak well to the entire critique that he would be able to bring to the story. And for me, yeah, these guys and they might not be as well known as a national media person, but they know the story better. They definitely know the story better. Trust me, I had many people sit here and say, "Oh, why don't you get XYZ music artists from Chicago to talk about the Jackie Robinson West team?" It's like, dude, he don't know what's going on. He might know it from a very superficial level, but this person right here knows it from the granular level. Like they were there, they know it, and they know it in an intimate way, and they're going to just be able to speak volumes to it. So there's a lot of that I had to fight back in terms of just the filmmaking aspect, because that is the thing. People want these flashy names and stuff, but sometimes they're just not the right people who are really going to give you the kind of critique and honesty and real talk that somebody like Lawrence Holmes did in our film.
Did you have any other, like you're saying, like moments of conflict while making the movie, while putting it together? Was there anything that that didn't flow or didn't go the way you wanted it to, or that you struggled with while making the film?
I wish we had Bill Haley do an interview after several attempts. It just wasn't going to happen. We had, personal reaching out to him, and I had an intermediary reach out to him, and it just didn't happen. It would have been nice, but yeah, as you mentioned earlier, silence sometimes says a lot. So I just think he's not ready there to still talk about what happened. Obviously, it would have been great if Little League would have had a statement or participated in the interview as well, but they declined to do so. And like we said, that says a lot also. I think kind of navigating some of the footage in terms of what we were going to be able to license and what we were going to be able to use fair use on was something that really took a long time for us to kind of navigate, digest, and edit, so that I want to say it probably added another year really of work to just really make sure we had all of our ducks in a row to make sure everything was cleared legally. That was probably the biggest challenge of making sure that our fair use usage was correct and would hold up. So those are probably the three things that kind of stick out for me.
There is like a moment early on in the film where you're watching the players run up the score on that one team. That image and footage there, it appears to be generative AI. Is it generative AI? And what was your purpose and cause of using it in that moment, as opposed to other methods? The rest of the movie is so in the archives and so in like digging up these images. So could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, no problem. So there's no footage of that game, right? There's no footage. The game you're talking about is the Evergreen Park versus Jackie Robinson West game. And, if you really think about this game that occurs, it's really the catalyst. It is the planting of the seed as to why the Evergreen Park coach, Chris James, blows the whistle and brings the first complaint about the neighborhood boundaries. Jackie Robinson West wins this game in an embarrassing fashion, like 43-2. And so I because there's no footage of that game, right? It's just like a regular Little League baseball game. Like no one's taken any. It's not on TV, and no one has taken any home videos of it. The only true picture is that picture of the scoreboard there that ends that sequence. I wanted to visually tell that story, so I knew I needed to do it in some sort of animated way. And so, what was the way to do that? And this was something that was a creative challenge on our end, thinking about how could we tell this story in a creative way that expressed some emotion, right? That you could see people's faces in that kind of way. So the actual images, they're not generative AI. They're not like we put in a prompt into Mid-Journey and said, "Hey, here, create a 12-year-old African American kid who's swinging a baseball bat." Our graphic designer there, he used AI to get a number of images as an image search, and then from that image search, he ended up creating his own images out of that, so maybe that's why they might resemble, at what an AI generator might come out and present. But he put his own take on all the imagery that he received. So, for that particular sequence, I kind of storyboarded it. I said, this is how I wanted to start it. I want to start with the pitcher looking in, and I want to have a, cut to the Jack Robinson pitcher, batter ready to bat, and then you see the ball. So each one of those shots I storyboarded, and then our graphic designer just kind of recreated those storyboards using the AI tools as that image search, but then, taking everything that he received and recreating them, and redrawing it and using After Effects and adding things onto it. There's lens flares and grain here and stuff like that. So he's trying to make it his own, I definitely understand why people would be like, "Oh man, this looks like AI," and I hate that.
Yeah, I mean, just speaking as someone, I worked in documentary, especially on the lower side of documentary. Worked for like a PBS affiliate for a little bit, and I had to create materials. I had to bring things together, and I understand that time crunch of like things have to go to air. We have to get things done. So I understand that like with tools the way they are, there could be this desire to use AI in that way. It's good to hear from you that it's like, this didn't replace a job, right? Like that's, I think, the thing that most people are worried about with AI right now. The conversation around it is like, is it replacing the work that someone does? And it's good to hear, like you're saying, like it was storyboarded by an artist and it was, made by an artist. So that sort of clears things up. I think there was some chatter after the movie of like, this movie's so good, what about that one scene? So I like that you're talking about it a little bit, and it clears up that element of the story. You mentioned the coach in the story, the one who is the team that gets stomped on, is the 43-2 or whatever the score was. He becomes a main figure of this story. He's really interesting to me in the documentary, and your inclusion of that coach, who sort of becomes the spokesperson against the team, and whether or not that's fair, you weigh in the documentary. Can you talk about your, that is a great example for the Bill Haleys of like, your story will be told no matter what. If you go and tell your own version, it might paint you in a different light. I'm sorry, I forgot the name of the coach.
Chris James.
Chris James, yeah. It's very fascinating. He's, a white man who becomes the face of like, well, we're against this team. And he also suffers from his own mental health crisis because of this moment. And him navigating that was so complicated in the story. Can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, I thought there's no doubt that Chris James is a very important part of this story. He is the coach that brings up the allegation that the team had ineligible players within the neighborhood boundary. And it's from that allegation that initially is just passed off by Little League. They dismiss it. It's not until a local reporter here takes up the story really brings it up to a national level. And at that point, that's where Little League feels like they have to do something about it. And every time, as the story is rising in relevancy, Chris James's name is attached to that because he's the person that brought up against the first complaint. And yeah, he's white, and so there's definitely this racial component toward the story. Is he a white coach? Is just going after these black kids in a very derogatory way, and so he's painted as a racist, and it's hard for him to kind of deal with that because we learn later that he is in an interracial marriage. His partner at the time is black, and so he has biracial children, and so can you really sit there and say is he a racist when has this kind of personal life and everything as well? And so people can kind of unpack that and deal with it and think about it in certain ways. And so, yeah, it all takes a toll on him, and he ends up getting arrested, getting drunk, and has a disorderly conduct charge from accidentally going to a wrong house there in his neighborhood and stuff. And so, yeah, I think for him, you mentioned that he had some mental health issues as well. He probably didn't realize that being a whistleblower was going to cause this kind of backlash and eventual trauma for him as well. What I admire about Chris is that he too could have said, nope, I don't want to talk about this anymore. I've lived it and I'm good. But for whatever reason, for his sake, he wanted to discuss his role in this entire story, and I appreciate him for doing that. And I think as a filmmaker, my intention is always to just kind of give him the opportunity to tell his side of the story and to be as fair as I can with that and with all that information there. And I believe that we were fair with his story. I've had people sit there and say, that we painted a portrait of him that was different than what the media had portrayed him. That was more human. That showed, sure, he might have been behind this, but he had some faults of his own, and he thought he was doing something that he thought was the right thing to do because he was approaching the entire incident from that ethical point of view. Like it was wrong that this team did this, that these adults did this to this team, and circumvented the rules, to get an advantage over other kids, so that's where he's moving in that direction and pursuing it from that ethical viewpoint. And I think when you're able to kind of sit back, this is like 11 years removed, and kind of re-interrogate the entire story, you might be able to see it from his point of view and understand where he was coming from. Maybe not necessarily agree with it still, which is fine, but at least understand where he was coming from, and that's always the way I kind of walk in the world. I always want to try to understand where people are coming from, certainly with viewpoints maybe that I don't maybe agree with or whatever. I just want to understand, how did they get to that viewpoint? How did they make that decision? I think that's really important to kind of understand. And a lot of times we've forgotten how to do that. Like we just don't want to sit there and understand where people are coming from. It's just like, I don't agree with that person. He's all the way over there, you know what I mean? Or that person. And I don't think that's the right way to walk in the world. We have to figure out, we got to walk in other people's shoes. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that empathetic viewpoint in life that has been missing for many, many years now. We need to get back to that so that we can have these understandings, that we can hopefully, work toward, making the world a better place for everybody. But in this regard with the story here, he was such an important part of it. And I'm just glad that we were able to get his viewpoint in the film.
So, Kevin, what is the next steps for One Golden Summer? What's the next step for this film? Do you have plans for it to live somewhere? Are you still seeking distribution? Is there a film adaptation coming out? These are things that I think people are wondering and asking about. And then as well, what are the next steps for you? Do you have any other work that you're working on and stuff?
We are we are still seeking distribution for the film. These deals are taking much, much longer now. They always took long to do, but now they're taking much, much longer to do. But we all feel really confident with how these discussions are moving forward. And so, it's my belief that in 2026, One Golden Summer will be on a streaming platform that everybody can watch, nationwide. So that's the belief there with that. In terms of other stuff that I'm working on, I'm working on a possible doc series about Oscar Robertson, the Big O, and doing his life story, which has never been told, and specifically looking at some of his activism as a labor organizer. He pretty much ushered free agency into the NBA when he was the labor president toward the end of his career. And he led a lawsuit against the NBA that eventually ushered in NBA free agency. And that was built off of, years of living for Oscar, in a discriminatory time that kind of helped galvanize him and moved him in terms of being a great labor leader and stuff. So that's kind of the next big project that I've got on store. Looking forward to continuing to work on, and hopefully that doesn't take 5 years to complete. But
Yeah.
we'll see.
You're finding out like how long these documentaries take. I'm so interested in that Oscar documentary. I players' rights are labor rights, and that's so important to me and in my understanding of sports. So I'm going to be day one viewer for that. So you have someone in the bag. Is there a Chicago movie that matters to you, or a Chicago documentary that matters to you?
I mean, I hate to be obvious, but it's tough to not mention Hoop Dreams as being that documentary for me. Obviously, Steve James is a colleague of mine now, and somebody that I'm working with on the Oscar Robertson project, and we're that movie has inspired many filmmakers. It certainly inspired me when I saw it back in 1995. I remember going to the theater and watching it based off a recommendation from my friend who said, "Man, yeah, it's a story about these kids from Chicago, and Isaiah Thomas is in it, and they're trying to get to the league." And you see areas that you're very familiar with, and your high schools that you've seen and stuff. And so and it really wasn't about the sports with that film. It was not about the basketball. It was about the life and the families and all those relationships. And I think when you watch a movie like that, like Hoop Dreams, and you see the type of resonance that it had on people, you realize the power of documentary filmmaking. Like, you could tell those kind of stories. You can tell those stories about people from underrepresented communities who don't get a lot of spotlight, who don't get a lot of shine, who get like more of a negative portrayal. But you don't see the light, you don't see the positivity that is there in those communities. And that was the kind of thing that I was called to. Like, I would love to continue to try to tell those kind of stories, and tell stories from those communities, and tell stories about things that you're not aware of, that are just right around the corner, or you avoid because you're thinking of something negative about that particular area, and not seeing the humanity that is really there, that is very common to your own humanity. So that film right there, obviously, is the one that really kind of sparked a light for me there, and made me want to continue to do this type of work.
I'm very much so looking forward to the future films that you make that shed further light on this city of ours that we love so much. Kevin, I love baseball so much, and I grew up playing. The one question I didn't ask you was if you played baseball.
I did, and I sucked at it.
What position did you play?
Oh, I was primarily first base and outfield. First base and outfield. Yeah. And so like man, I think growing up, I was just kind of afraid of the ball, So like when they're throwing the ball at me, first base, I'm kind of like, you know. And I remember one time in the outfield, the ball trying to get a fly ball and it actually like hit me in the head. I don't know what the hell I was doing, So yeah, that was not my best sport at all.
That's okay. Did you have another sport that was yours?
You know what? I ended up playing soccer. I played a little bit of basketball, but I played soccer. That was a sport that I played the most in. Right?
Mhm.
Like, when you're young there in high school, before, when I was growing up, before like all this AAU stuff, and you had to play club to play
Right.
just high school sports, you could just play, right?
Right.
And so for me, the sport that I played the most in was actually soccer. I got the most run in that. I was a striker, left side, and I played. I started, I made a couple goals, scored a couple goals, that kind of thing. So that was the one that I had the most success with.
Yeah, that was your bright shining moment.
That was my bright shining moment. Yes.
Yeah, my bright shining moment. Do you remember Gary Fensick, the Bears player?
Yeah, safety.
Yeah, he had a son named Garrison Fensick who hit the longest home run in Wells Park history off me. I was pitching and he hit.
Oh no!
I believe it went 400 feet. It hit the library on Lincoln.
Oh my God!
So that's my claim to fame.
Ouch.
So now we're filmmakers. So now we tell stories.
Exactly. Now we tell stories. We can still love and appreciate the sport, but we don't have to necessarily play it.
Exactly. Is there a Chicago food place, a restaurant that you recommend? We like to ask our guests that to shine a light on the amazing food that's being done in the city. So can you recommend a place for us?
Well, I would say there's two that come to mind, right? So people are always looking at the Chicago pizza and the Chicago steakhouses. And so for me, my favorites are pizza-wise, I would go with Pequod's because, it's just the crust there is immaculate. It's the best. It adds a little something else to the deep dish feel that is different than the others, which they're good as well. But, Pequod's is on the top of my list. And then in terms of steakhouse, I don't think there's a better place than Bavette's, which is a great little spot. Amazing food there. They used to have this candied bacon, which was just like melt in your mouth as an appetizer. So those are my two recommendations, Pequod's and Bavette's.
Some great recommendations right there. Thank you so much for being on the podcast, Kevin.
Jeremy, thank you. It was great talking to you today.
Please be considerate when talking on your phone or listening to electronic devices.